Hi, and welcome to Stunt Flyer Video Magazine. As you can see, I've been getting a bit of building done this past month. What I'm holding here is a replica of Dave Gerke's original Novi. This is the wing for the Novi. And this wing was designed as a full-depth rib I-beam type wing. Now, most I-beam wings feature strip ribs, one strip on top and one strip on the bottom at each rib station laying over an I-beam spar. This particular type of I-beam features a full depth rib which has a rectangular cutout at the spar location, and then the ribs are slid up onto the I-beam spar and then positioned and glued. And it struck me that this was a natural to give lost foam a try in I-beam construction, and it's worked out very, very well. I actually decided to build this airplane now because I was invited to give a talk at the KRC Electric Flight Symposium on lightweight building techniques. And it just struck me that an I-beam full-depth rib would be exactly the type of construction that the radio control electric world would like to know about. And indeed they did. They really thought it was very interesting. Not only that, they really enjoyed the whole presentation on geodetic type ribbing and Warren Truss type ribbing, molded leading edges, and so forth. We have a lot in common with the electric radio control flyer, as we're both looking to build lighter, stronger airplanes and extract more performance from them. So we're kindred spirits in that respect. And we'll have more on this particular type of construction at a later time. And I'm hoping that I can get this airplane done for Tucson and be the first one there with an original Novi. Back in February, I took a trip to Frank McMillan's home in San Antonio, Texas. I wanted to visit Frank because he was one of the first to have the, at that time, the PA-61 in an airplane flying. He was one of the first ones to have it out flying. And I had an opportunity to go visit him and talk with him about his history in stunt and fly his airplane. And boy, did it fly great. But now the interview with Frank takes on even more significance because, as many of you know from reading Stunt News, Frank is the Pampa President-elect. And we'd like to thank Frank for taking on this post. I know it's another thing in his life he really didn't need, but Frank is the type of individual who will pick up challenges and will extend himself for the good of the many. And in this case, he really has done that. Frank is a very fair-minded, mature, and organized individual who will serve Pampa well in his tenure, I'm sure. I would also like to thank outgoing President Mike Cavill, another organized and fair-minded individual who has improved Pampa during his stay in the presidency. So, Mike, if you're watching, from all of us, thanks a lot. We sure appreciate it. When we come back here from San Antonio, we're going to produce a control horn. We're going to show you how to make your own control horns, and then we're going to hinge that stabilizer and elevator assembly that we built in the last issue. Now, there's a lot of things to discuss in hinging and horn installation and so forth that are very important. There may not be the most glamorous parts of building a model airplane, but they're certainly some of the most difficult to get right. And it's very important, if your airplane is to fly right, that those elements are built right. So we're going to take some time and make sure that we all understand how to put hinges in correctly and how to line things up, because it's really there that your control system smoothness starts. After that, I'm going to move from this side of the camera to the other side of the camera and shoot a segment of Engine Basics with Dean Pappas. Now, this time Dean is going to be talking on uniflow theory and uniflow design, and he's actually going to show us how to vent a plastic tank with a uniflow setup. This is one of the more often asked questions I get, is how do you vent a plastic tank with a Uniflow setup. And Dean's going to cover the whole thing in detail, so please don't miss that segment. Well, there's a lot of useful stunt information in this issue, and we have a long way to go in the next 2 hours, so let's get to it. Frank McMillan has spent the past 47 plus years becoming an overnight stunt sensation. Few of the newcomers to model aerobatic flying know the whole story of Frank's life, which has never been focused very far from the center of the stunt circle. In 1957, Frank won the coveted stunt crown at the legendary Mirror Meet, a one-day super contest held at Floyd Bennett Field in New York, and sponsored by the now defunct Daily Mirror newspaper. Flying his original design Gambler, Frank bested all comers at this contest, and he might have rocketed to the very top of the stunt event nationally soon after that, but for a stop-off at a Times Square Air Force recruiting center in 1958. Frank served with distinction in the Air Force for over 26 years, ultimately attaining the rank of colonel. He amassed over 6,600 hours flying in B-52s, various models of RC-135s, and AC-130 gunships. His story is a long and interesting one, and the interview you're about to join is but a small segment of a very interesting 2-hour visit. The remainder of this interview will soon be available as a feature video from Robin's View Productions. Frank's main interest lies in scale stunt and includes the production of 2 outstanding Martin Baker MB-5s and an entire series of Super Caudron stunters. Flying his Caudrons, Frank has placed himself firmly in the top 10 in recent seasons, and this year he placed an outstanding 4th at a hotly contested nationals. Let's now hear from Frank about the lineage of his very competitive Caudron series of stunters. We're sitting here behind Frank's Super Caudron. Now, Frank will call this a Caudron throughout this entire interview, but it is actually a Caudron. That's how the French pronounce this, and it is a semi-scale French racing plane. Frank, can you tell us a little bit about how you came about this particular design and how you got into the machine type airplane in general?
Well, as we had discussed before, the lineage of this airplane comes back from essentially way back into the Dudka matrix design. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that Lou did when he passed on the information is he also exposed me to the technology of making the foam wings. Mm-hmm. So as I acquired that, and after his original airplane, I actually started making my own foam wings. And that caused a series of airplanes that were, I would have to say, after the success of going to the Final 5 in '87, a little bit of I can make anything fly. Mm-hmm. And it also, what it really caused was a series of airplanes that were somewhat less than successful. So I had, there were 3 airplanes in there that really weren't all that good. And then I had another one finally that turned out to be a pretty decent airplane. It was another Magna. And what made that airplane fly, actually, it wanted to drop out on the bottoms. And what made it fly was an extension to the flaps of about 3/8 of an inch. And what we found out was that that particular wing was fine up to about 60 ounces, but then when it got over 60 ounces, it needed more flap. And that is essentially the results of why this airplane shows more flap than some of the earlier airplanes. Now, This airplane and the number one was the successor. They were both essentially made at the same time. Are the result of reevaluating the Magna design and the idea that the airplane used to look like it was flying, like its tail was dragging on the ground. And I wanted something that was more into the classic style of airplane. Enter the Super Caudron.
He's going to make me a liar.
Oh yeah, I will. The use of that design really goes back to George's Aldrich's Nobler design, which was patterned after the Caudron C460, the golden age of air racing.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that as I looked at that airplane, it would be somewhat stylized, and I really didn't want to copy the paint job, but I liked the lines of it. Now, as it turned out, there were other Caudron airplanes, which was essentially a French manufacturer. They had some light fighter airplanes just prior to World War II. And in reality, this is more like theirs. Now, what I did to make the airplane look more scale-like is I used the same technique that we used to generate the Martin Baker aircraft. I actually shot some transparencies and took the moments that I wanted to use and put them up on the wall and started projecting and sizing and looking at the curves of the airplane. And in many respects, the curves of the airplane in the side view is actually proportioned to look like some of the Caudron C-720s or 740s, some of the later Caudron fighters that are represented in some of the green fighter documentation series. Mm-hmm. So what we see here is actually the second, and it's in reality the same as the first. It contains the original Dudka style airfoils and tail and the same moments. Now, what we found out after flying these airplanes for many years is that they were wonderful flying airplanes. They had a good groove and a fantastic corner, but being equal panel wings and being high aspect ratio wings, there were times you could get yourself in real problems with the trim. And now with the extended flaps, they have an area of on the order of about 740, which is a fairly good size for a 60 style airplane. This started out life as a 60 airplane. Was never flown as a 60 airplane. The number one was flown as a 60 airplane and gave good service. But in reality, when I flew it at the Nats in I guess it was what, 92 was Westover? Mm-hmm. That was the real reason that caused me to go to the pipe. I had the ST60 in it, and I thought our 60s were as good as anybody's. But we got up there, and I was completely outclassed in terms of being able to handle the big variance in weather. We had wind, we had dead air, and I was watching those piped airplanes handle that, and I said, I'm going to do something. So I came home and I cut the bottom off of this airplane, gutted the bottom, and fitted a pipe to it. And after working with another test bed airplane, I finally found out what figured the pipe to work. And what happened is this airplane started flying, instead of flying 5.3 with the 60 and having some problems in the extremities with line tension, all of a sudden I had an OPS 40 in it. And I was flying at 5.5 on longer lines with no problems. And in
heavier winds, too.
And heavier air, that's right. So it then became the prototype for it. This particular airplane, I didn't fly in a whole lot of contests, although it is, in fact, a very capable airplane. And I have one of the first prototype runs of the PA-61 in it right now. It is a very capable airplane. But essentially, it was the second in the series, and it was the first 60. It was built as a 60 airplane. It's not particularly heavy. It's at 62 ounces, which for that area is a reasonably reasonable weight of airplane. But as you've commented on, some other people have commented, it looks like I've got a profile canopy in there. When in point of fact, the real airplanes were actually fairly thin, and proportionally, it's pretty close to being real. But I thought what I would do is start changing it. And about that time, I wanted to change the wing. I figured that I was seeing too many difficulties with the high aspect ratio wing in terms of the initial trim. Not when they were finally trimmed out. When they were finally trimmed out, they were all it was a very competitive plan for them, but it was just giving us too many problems. So what I decided to do was in the next airplane was to go to the to a built-up wing, and the wing that I chose was essentially the latest version of the Junar wing, but in a bigger plan form. And I wound up in the number 3 airplane with a similar paint scheme with a built-up wing, a more scale-like fuselage in terms of rounding of the fuselage, a little more depth, better canopy presentation, and a more smooth turtle deck. Also changed the rudder shape just slightly. So in effect, what I wound up with is an airplane that was very similar to this, but actually with a built-up tail and a flat tail. First flat stab airplane I built, a very good flying airplane. It turned out it was a little bit bigger than I imagined. I got carried away with the basic wing, and it turned out to be about a 780 square inch airplane, which was huge, but it only weighed 61 ounces.
I remember it really looked big in the air.
Oh yeah, it did. And flying the OPS, Lubbock was its first year. It was straining. It was straining. It did it, but it wasn't in that nice 4 cycle that I saw at sea
You had
level.
it working really well up in Washington the following year, though.
Washington, I would have to say I had some really good flights with it. The air was good. The airplane flew well. I would at Lubbock I think we were 8th at Lubbock. We were out of the top 10 at
Washington.
Yeah, we were shot out of the air by the B-17 at Washington. Although I would have to say I certainly wasn't disappointed with my flying up there. I thought I had a particularly good, and the scores were very high and they were very close. So
It was a high-scoring national.
yeah, it was. Probably that airplane's best flights were at the team trials that same year. I thought particularly the motor ran exceptionally well. I had some wonderful brakes in it, and I was very satisfied with the OPS. But at that time, the first PA-51s were showing up, and
It rode the horse of a different color.
oh, totally different motor. And although I had it, I didn't get a chance to use it until later on that fall, and actually never put one in that airplane. The first airplane I had it in was one of Randy's SV-12 XLs, and after some initial teething problems with the setup, boy, I was impressed with it. And I subsequently put it in the number 4 Caudron, which was a built-up airplane where I had taken the design and maintained the essence of it and just shrunk it down slightly into the 660 size, which was the Super Saturn type wing.
Actually was one of Billy's. Billy actually came up with that set of airfoils when he developed the Cobra 7 for Mike Dietrich, the aerodynamics for that, and the Junar that he flew in Lubbock was also that set of airfoils. So that set of airfoils really, while most people attribute it to the Saturn, really was Billy's and predated the Saturn by a number of years. So
Well,
to give credit where credit's due here.
That particular one turned out to be probably the most successful airplane of the series in terms of aesthetics. The color scheme was a slight modification of this one, but getting away from some of the yellows into the rainbow. I call it the rainbow airplane. But the white with all the other colors gave it a real flash in the clear air.
Everybody really liked the appearance of that airplane. I know Larry Scarinzi told me in a phone conversation recently, he said that was the most beautiful airplane he'd ever seen, in his estimation.
Well, that was the airplane that I had my first lengthy experience with the PA-51. And
being a lot of horsepower in a smaller airplane.
And boy, did the package change things. Where it really changed things, down here in Texas, we face extremes of temperature that most people don't face. Where we really get hit is in the we'll go out in the morning, let's say in the middle of the summer, and we might start out at 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning at 75 to 80 degrees. Well, by 11 o'clock it's well over 90, and by the middle of the afternoon, it's particularly on the concrete, as the concrete heats up, you're facing 110 degree temperatures. And what you see with the airplane is that with the 40s and with the 60s even more, is that you wind up all of a sudden things are dropping out. The square eights are falling off in the corners. With the pipes, you didn't see that so much, but what you had to do with them is instead of being able to run a 2-blade, you have to go to 3-blade to get the blade density to push the air to get you out. And even then, the OPS 40 was starting to strain. Now, the difference with the 51 is that you could feel that the air was getting hotter, but you didn't have that straining, and you didn't have to make the big adjustments. The range was broader. Now, with the new motor, what we're seeing is
we're talking about the 61
it doesn't matter. you just turn it on, and you may feel that it's getting hotter, but the motor has so much more to give that it just doesn't seem to matter anymore. But perhaps we ought to look at the number 3 airplane, and then we may even look at 4 and 5.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what. Let's take those airplanes outside in natural sunlight, and we'll take some video of those on the ground and let you hold them and move them around a little bit, so we can see some of the aspects of the airplanes in a different environment here. I think it's so beautiful outside. We're sitting here February 2nd, and it's 78 degrees outside.
It's going to be pushing 80 by the time we get out of there. And it's dead air, and other people, and the phone has been ringing off the hook for people wanting to go fly, and I'm ready to go fly it too. I'd like to go fly. I'd like to let you fly this airplane. You've never flown one of the 60 airplanes.
It might be a good idea to go out to the field and fly one of them.
Yeah,
it'd
be nice.
At any rate, we're going to take a break here, and we're going to go outside, and we'll pick this up with number 4 and 5.
Well, let's show 3, since we talked about 3, and then we'll show briefly, and then we'll show 4 and 5.
Sounds good to me. We'll see you outside.
Okay. This is the number 3 Caudron again. It has a built-up wing as opposed to the previous airplane's foam wings. It has the Juno wing, and it's approximately 780 or so square inches. The lines are generally the same as the previous airplane, although we changed the cockpit area to get a little bit more finesse there. This is also the flat stab airplane that had a somewhat unique history. Immediately, we thought it was a better airplane than the number 2 airplane. But one of the things that we saw at Lubbock is that it tended to unusually or unpredictably pop out of some maneuvers. So what we did is we actually took and sheeted the stab, changing it from a built-up open base structure into a sheeted structure. And almost immediately with that, we found out this was quite a good airplane. We flew it at initially at Lubbock, and we were 8th there. We were 11th at the Washington Nationals, and then the team trials there, we wound up to be 9th. It's an exceptionally good airplane. We flew it mostly with the OPS 40, but just recently we've changed and taken and had it with the PA 61 in it. And I have to tell you, that was an instant airplane. We literally threw it at the airplane, had 3 practice flights, and after the first flight we knew we really had something. Took it to the Dallas contest, and with 1 practice flight up there, so a total of 4 practice flights. It really flew well in heavy turbulence with the PA. This is an outstanding airplane that I'm going to hold and not put too much practice on, because we can always throw it at and get it to fly. It's particularly light at about 61 ounces for that area, and with the power and controllability of the PA-61, it makes an awesome combination. So this is going to be there as a weapon to hold in reserve if we really need it. Now this is the Caudron 4 design. It basically is shrunk down into the 660 size wing, which is the Super Saturn wing, and it uses the Hunt lost foam method type construction. It doesn't have the later molded leading edge because this was built a little bit earlier on for that. But I have to say I think this is probably the most successful of the series so far, particularly in terms of as I shrunk down the size, the aesthetics of the airplane got better. With the this is the first airplane that was actually designed for the PA-51, and as we've used it, we found out that boy, this is quite a combination. I think the color scheme also highlights the airplane in particular, because with the combination of shades and colors and stars and the flashes of white, it makes the airplane a very attractive airplane. Also, this is the first airplane that we actually had a molded canopy that suits the design. We actually took and carved the fuselage, and then from that carving cut out the section for the canopy and had the canopy molded from it. So we did a pretty nice canopy job on this airplane. Now in the underneath, we cleaned up the front of the airplane a bit and put a lot more cooling holes in it, and then went on to flash the thing. As we get more proficient with the piped installation, we wind up with a cleaner installation and shorter, because we tend to look more at the correct settings, and we don't have to accommodate longer reaches on the thing. With this airplane, again, we've gone to the flat stab, which I think is much more appropriate. And what we find with this particular design of airplane is that they tend to stay exactly where they're put. They groove, they position very well, and they because of the larger area stab, which is approximately 26% of area on this airplane, they tend to have an exceptionally nice corner. The weight on this airplane is about 59 ounces. With the PA-51 made it for an exceptional power package, and really we can't wait to try the 61 in this airplane, which we've not done yet, which would be even better. It's in good shape, and I imagine we'll probably use this airplane at next year's Nationals. Okay, this is the next generation in the Super Caudron series, the number 5 airplane. And really it represents not much of a departure, more of an evolutionary attack to it. We're still trying things with the design, although we were absolutely happy with the number 4. The number 5 has a slightly different wing. I've actually gone and gone in between the number 3, which was about a 780, and the number 4, which was about a 660. This is about a 720, and it's the GOXL wing, built again on the lost foam method that Bob Hunt popularized, and I have to say it's a wonderful way to do things. This one has the molded leading edge, the later technology, and has been flown, I would say about 8 times. And is one of those airplanes that appears to be going right off the board. It has a slightly bigger stab and elevator. This is about 27%. I don't know that it makes a whole lot of difference. The only thing I can tell you is that the airplane sits in a groove, turns really nice rounds, and has an absolutely blinding corner. We've changed the paint scheme just a little bit, but again, it's evolutionary. We've got our eagle on there, and this is flown with the PA-51 that I use in the number 4 airplane at the Nats with the same setup. It was thrown at this airplane and put together. It ran right off the bat for the first time, to the point where that Frank Williams flew it on the 5th flight, and again, he was impressed. I tried to change the shape of the cowling a little bit and cleaned it up and made it more aesthetic, but for the most part these are still all detail changes, and changed the color scheme just a little bit, but it's another successful airplane that I'm sure when we get more time will be a pretty competent performer. Whether it's going to make this year's Nats, it depends on the weather and how much time we have to change it, but right now I would say that if I didn't have anything else, I could get this going in 2 sessions and it'd be a great airplane.
Without having to try too hard, we were able to convince Frank to head for the field for a flying session with the PA-61 powered Caudron number 2.
Well, it's been the end of a wonderful day. We've enjoyed visiting with you and sharing some of the airplanes that we've built and flown over the years and some of the thoughts we've had. We were fortunate enough to have an absolutely wonderful day where we could go out and end the day with a nice flying session. We certainly thank you all and hope you enjoy the tape as much as Bob and I have enjoyed making it. Bye-bye from Texas.
In the last issue of Stunt Flyer Video Magazine, we built this half-inch thick flat plate stabilizer and elevator assembly. And as I said goodbye in that issue, I was pretty much holding it in this position. I really haven't done anything more to it since then because I want to show you how to install horns and hinges. There are as many different ways to achieve this as there are modelers. Everyone seems to have their own little technique for hinging movable surfaces onto fixed surfaces, and everyone seems to have their own pet way of installing a control horn and anchoring it very rigid. I'm going to show you my way, a way that I've come up with that I like, and but please understand that there are other methods, and this is just one way of doing it, but it's worked for me over the years. No matter which system you choose to use, there are a few things which are basic to hinging. One is the surfaces to be hinged must be accurate. Now, last issue we showed how to build a flat stabilizer so it lays perfectly flat on a table and doesn't have any twists or warps in it or bows in the surfaces to be mated with hinges. That's very important that these surfaces not have any bows either in dihedral or anhedral, but also that there's no chordwise bows or irregularities in the hinge line. And I think that goes without saying, really, that's paramount here, that we have a straight trailing edge to the stabilizer in this case, and straight leading edges to the elevators. Very important. And very easy to achieve. A sanding block and a little bit of work, and you can make these surfaces mate perfectly together. And please take time to do that no matter what type of surface you're working on. One of the things I feel is of paramount importance in hinging is to be sure that the center line or the center pivot point of the control horn wire agrees with the center pivot point of each hinge barrel as you go out. If the hinge barrels are set further forward or further aft than the pivot point of the horn wire, then the result will be an arcing someplace in the system. And if anything is forced to arc rather than pivot, it will wear out prematurely. So you want to take some time here to make sure that all of the center lines of the horn barrels and the control horn wire all agree. Very important. And we'll show you how to do that as we progress. You can see here that we have an old-time stunt airplane, my Frisky Pete, and this has got maybe 150, 200 flights on it, and you can see how smooth these controls are. I can move these controls up and down with one wire, and virtually they should fall. Yeah, they lightly fall. If you just rattle the airplane a little bit, the elevator will fall from its own weight. This is a good thing. It means your controls are fairly smooth, and there's no binding in them, and that's pretty much what you want. Nice, smooth, free-acting controls. if you have any kind of bind in them, when you get into low line tension situations, it may actually stop at a point until you get some tension on the wire, and it'll give you a actual flat spot in a maneuver where you may not want one. So it's important to have very, very smooth controls so that even the slightest amount of line tension will be able to move those controls freely. As a bonus in this section, I'm going to show you how to construct your own control horns. Now, many of you may want to experiment with different horn ratios or different speeds of control systems. The latest craze, of course, is to move the center of gravity further aft and use slower controls. And there's very few control systems available commercially to do this, especially if you want to experiment with each airplane with a different type of control system. You really want to come up with a way of making your own control horns. Now, that can be very scary because, as we know, control horns really undergo a lot of stress over a long period of time, and they must be built very robustly so they don't break. And Dean Pappas and Rich Tower and I came up with a system back in 1986 to build our own horns using a homemade fixture and mostly materials that could be found at the local hobby shop. Now, there is one part of this system I'm going to show you that's critical, and that is the horn to upright joint. That joint must be made with brazing rod, with brazing wire, instead of silver solder that you might find in a hobby shop. Apparently there's a brand out there now calling itself silver solder, which is actually just a solder. A good rule of thumb to remember is anything that will melt with your soldering iron is not to be used at the horn to upright joint. You want to have something there that requires you to use a Bernzomatic at least to melt it. And I use 2% silver braze. This can be found at very good hardware stores, at some hobby shops which carry a lot of the locomotive components, model railroading components. They might have actual brazing wire. At any rate, call around to welding supply houses or wherever, find yourself some of this silver braze, and get some flux too. You're going to need that. Other than that, all the pieces we're going to be discussing for this homemade control horn, you should have either already in your shop or you should be able to buy at your local hobby shop. So, why don't we get going now and build a fixture in which we can construct our own control horns and then go ahead and build a horn. To construct a custom horn, you will need a piece of 3/32 inch music wire, a length of K&S 1/8 inch outside diameter brass tubing, a length of K&S 1/8 inch by 1/4 inch rectangular brass stock, 2 strips of 1/8 inch by 1/4 inch plywood, a piece of 1/8 inch plywood for the fixture base, CA glue, a Dremel hand grinder fitted with a cutoff disc, brazing wire and flux, and an acid brush. Make the fixture base approximately 8 inches long. In the center of the base, scribe 2 parallel pen lines 1/8 inch apart. 1/4 of an inch in from the bottom edge, draw 2 sets of parallel pen lines 1/8 inch apart. The center of the fixture should be cut out as shown. This cutout should be approximately 2 inches in depth. Note how this allows the fixture to be flexed. Sand the 1/8 inch brass tubing until clean and bright. Measure the width of the fixture arms. Mark the tubing to fit that dimension as shown. A K&S tubing cutter or a long knife blade can be used to cut brass tubing. Here's how the K&S tubing cutter works. And here's how to cut tubing with a knife blade. Skive the burrs from the inside of the tubing as shown. Test fit the tubes to the 3/32 inch wire. Slide both tubes onto the wire and position as shown. Hold the tubes in place and carefully CA glue. Do not let any glue get into the tubes. Now remove the wire from the tubes. Using a scriber to mark the rectangular stock, measure 1/8 inch from one end and scribe a mark. Determine the distance from the horn pivot point to the pushrod bearing and scribe a mark. Scribe a cross mark in the center of the tube at each hole location. Drill the horn wire hole with a 3/32 inch drill and the pushrod tube bearing hole with a 1/8 inch drill. Here's the 3/32 inch horn wire, the fixture base, the rectangular brass stock, two 1/8 inch outside diameter brass tube retainer bearings, and two 1/8 inch by 1/4 inch plywood strips. Assemble the pieces as shown. Now glue the 1/8 by 1/4 inch ply strips to the base as shown in this sequence. These pieces position the rectangular brass stock perpendicular to the horn wire. They should fit snugly against the rectangular stock. Clamp the pieces into the fixture as shown, and then clamp this assembly into a vise. Light a propane torch. Note, the hottest part of the flame is at the tip of the blue cone. Apply some flux to the joint to be brazed. Heat the joint and then apply a very small amount of brazing wire as shown. The braze will flow throughout the joint. When the joint has cooled, file the horn wire clean and smooth. Remove the assembly from the horn fixture. Put on a pair of safety goggles and using a Dremel tool fitted with an abrasive disc, cut the rectangular tubing off 1/8 inch above the pushrod bearing. With a file, half round both ends of the rectangular tubing as shown. Cut a 1/4 inch long piece of 1/8 inch outside diameter tubing. This tubing will be installed in the upper hole in the horn. This bearing can be soldered in place using regular rosin core solder. Apply some solder paste to the joint and then solder the tube in position. File the ends of the tubing and deburr the inside as shown. Using thinner or acetone, wet a paper towel and clean the paste from the joint. Measure the distance between the elevators as shown. Determine how far out from the center the horn arms will have to be bent and mark with a pen. Using a Dremel tool fitted with a 3/32 to 1/8 inch diameter carbide bit, grind a radius into one of the jaws of your vise. Don't forget to wear the safety goggles. Here's a tip. Cut a length of heavy gauge solder and mark a simulated center post position with a felt tip pen. Now measure and mark the position of the bend point of the horn arm. Clamp this piece in the vise and measure from the simulated center to the first bend point. Bend the solder around the grooved jaw and measure the bend to ensure that it is the right length. Repeat if necessary to get the right dimension, and then mark and bend the actual horn accordingly. You may have to finish the bend with a pair of round-nosed pliers. Measure the distance of the bend from the center of the horn carefully. Repeat this bending process for the other horn leg. Sight and tweak the horn wires as required and measure across the legs as shown. Mark the length of the horn legs and cut to length using an abrasive disc in the Dremel tool. Remember the goggles. Here's the finished part. Well, there you have it. There's a very simple method to construct your own control horns. And this particular control horn is an elevator horn. It's made with 3/32 inch wire. And the upright has a cross bushing which is positioned 9/10 of an inch above the pivot point of the control horn wire. Now this will correspond to another bushing in the flap horn, which is also 9/10 of an inch up from the pivot point of the horn wire. And above that will be another cross bushing in the flap horn, which will be approximately 1.3 to 1.5 inches above the pivot point of the horn wire. I haven't decided about the ultimate speed of that system yet. But again, the slower you make your controls, the more you can move your CG aft and still have the airplane not feel sensitive with a standard handle spacing. And we'll get into that when we get to the field at a later date. At any rate, this is a way of making a control horn. Now, if you're going to build 1/8" horns, now I generally use 3 32nd-inch wire horns. If you're going to use 1/8" wire in your horns, you may find that you will not be able to bend it the way we showed. You'll certainly be able to bend it in the vise with the radius jaw, but you may not be able to finish the bend with a pair of round nose pliers as we described. You'd be pretty strong if you could bend it 1/8" wire by hand with round nose pliers. So you may have to modify this fixture to take pre-bent wires before you braze the uprights onto them. Now, again, I don't use 1/8" wire, so there's no need for that in my case. But if you need to modify this fixture in such a way that you can bend your 1/8" wires using a K&S wire bender or the radiused jaw in the vise as we described, and then braze your rectangular stock upright to the wire. I'll leave that for you to decide. So let's go on now and install this control horn that we've produced into the elevator from the stabilizer and elevator assembly that we produced in the last issue of Stunt Flyer Video Magazine. And now I have some my own pet ways of doing this, and I'm going to describe them now. Position the horn as shown and measure the distance from the center of a horn leg to the edge of the elevator. The horn anchors are made from very hard 1/4 inch thick by 1 inch wide balsa. Measure the width of the elevator at the root and lay out 2 pieces of the hard anchor stock as shown. These pieces should be just slightly wider than the elevators to allow for fitting. Cut out the horn anchor blanks using a scroll saw. Mark these blanks as shown and scribe a pen line down the center. Mark the center of the elevators as shown at both the front and the rear. Transfer the center line on the anchor blanks to the front edge as shown. Now measure and mark the position of the horn wire hole on the front of the anchor blanks. Using a small triangle as shown, accurately clamp an anchor blank in a drill press vise with the center line perpendicular to the top of the jaws. Carefully drill a 3 32nd-inch horn leg hole as shown, and repeat the process with the other anchor blank. Transfer the center line to the other side of the anchor blanks. Orient the parts as shown in this view, and assemble them to look like this. Measure across the blanks at both ends. Bend to adjust if necessary, then remeasure. Measure how far the horn sticks out of the blank, and then mark the inside face of the blank for inletting. Using a sharp number 11 blade, cut down to the horn wire hole as shown in this sequence. Reassemble the pieces as shown. Position the center lines of the elevators onto the center line of the horn anchors and scribe a pen line as shown in this sequence. Using a scroll saw, cut just outside the scribed pen lines. I use Elmer's brand aliphatic resin glue to attach the horn anchors to the elevators. Position and pin the elevators to the anchor blanks and let dry. Remove the pins and sand the anchors to match the elevators as shown here. Scribe a pen line 1/8 of an inch back and parallel to the leading edge of the elevators. Do this on both sides of both elevators. Measure and mark 1/32 of an inch either side of center on the front face of both elevators, and then scribe pen lines between the marks as shown. Using a razor plane, begin cutting a bevel between the mark on the top of the elevator and the upper mark on the front of the elevator. Repeat this process for the other side of the elevator leading edge. Finish the bevel between the lines with a sanding block, checking often for shape. Here's how the bevel should look when finished. Assemble the parts as shown and position a straight edge against the leading edge to check for accuracy. Adjust if necessary by bending the horn legs. Place the elevator assembly against the trailing edge of the stabilizer and mark the position of the horn upright as shown. Using a sharp number 11 blade knife, carefully cut just enough clearance for the upright to swing through its arc freely. Tape one side of the elevator assembly to the stabilizer for positioning, and then lay the hinges across the gap on the other side. Measure and mark for final placement as shown in this sequence. Mark the flats of the beveled elevator leading edge as shown here for hinge inletting. Using a very sharp number 11 blade knife, make a cut at either end of the hinge location. Do not cut deeper than 3/4 of the thickness of the hinge barrel. Now, carve the wood from the hinge slot locations as shown. Here is a hinge slot sanding tool originally designed by Wendy Ertnowski. Note that the width of the hinge determines how wide the sanding face of the tool will be. The depth is set by the thickness of the face piece. Insert the tool into a slot and sand as shown until the plywood stop hits the front edge of the elevator. Measure and mark the top to bottom center of each end of each hinge pocket. Scribe a pen line between these marks as shown to depict the location of the hinge slots. Do this very accurately. The tang of the average plastic hinge is near the same thickness as an X-Acto number 27 saw blade. Use a number 11 blade knife to make the initial slit. Insert the number 27 saw blade in the knife slit and open the slit as shown. Again, work accurately. Now, test fit the hinge into the slot. Here's a way to make sure all of the hinge barrels are in line when installing the hinges at final assembly. Transfer the position of the hinges to the rear face of the stabilizer. Measure and mark the hinge center lines as you did on the elevators. Slit the trailing edge of the stabilizer for the hinges as shown. But remember, this stabilizer has a carbon trailing edge face, and the knife will not cut through it. Use a Dremel tool fitted with a cutting disc to grind through the center of the carbon strip. Finish the slot with the number 27 saw blade as shown. Test fit a hinge in the slot. Note how the hinge protrudes through the carbon strip. Dry fit the assembly with hinges and check the freedom of movement. Even though the hinges have holes for glue, I like to grind small reverse sawtooth slots in the edges for even better grip. Especially important when using aliphatic glue to install the hinges, as I do. Well, there you have it, a fully hinged stabilizer and elevator assembly. The hinges in this case have not been glued in yet. I prefer to cover the surfaces and dope them, and in some cases even install the stabilizer into the fuselage prior to installing the elevators. Matter of fact, in some cases I actually install all the movable surfaces after they're painted and cleared. Put them on afterwards. Makes it a lot easier to get into the hinge line. Although I've done it both ways, and both ways work. I've covered them and installed the hinges prior to painting the airplane too. And that seems to work well too. That's a personal preference thing. I'm going to leave that up to you. At any rate, the important things have been covered here. Everything is straight. The hinge line is straight. There's no misalignment in a vertical plane. The hinges are lined up vertically, and as you look down from the top, they're lined up so that they're not cocked one way or the other. The center of the hinge barrel is in line with the center of the horn wire, and we have a smooth operating, albeit somewhat squeaky unit here. These hinges do need some oil in them. So we'll oil those after they've been installed in the airplane and all the paint's on and there's no danger of contamination. Then we'll oil these hinges. At any rate, there it is, a fully hinged stabilizer and elevator assembly. We're going to cover cloth hinging in a future issue. Hope you enjoyed it. Hi. If you're like me, or most enthusiasts of any type, you have a collection of photographs more or less like the one you see here before me. This is but a small portion of my photographic collection that I've amassed over the years. I literally have thousands and thousands of photographs sent to me by modelers when I worked for Flying Models magazine, and pictures that I took at nationals, and pictures that people sent to me from all over the world for one reason or another. And I've collected them all, I've kept them all. But unfortunately, I've never had a chance to put them in any sort of order. And so I decided in this issue of Stunt Flyer Video Magazine to start a new feature called Stunt Flyer Video Magazine Scrapbook. And in this way, maybe I can share with you some of these images that I've collected from over the years. Now, these will include some of my airplanes and some of my friends' airplanes, and airplanes I don't even know. I'm not even sure of the lineage of some of these airplanes. But I'll try as best I can to identify them as they come on screen. And if I have some I can't identify and you recognize them, maybe you can write in and tell us what airplane it is that's on screen that's unidentified. We'd also like to extend an invitation for you to send in your photographs. And please send a self-addressed stamped envelope if you want the photograph back. And as we have room, we'll try to include all your photographs in SFVM Scrapbook. So, enjoy.
Well, hello there again. It's time for another installment of Engine Basics. And as promised last time we met, we're going to talk about tanks. That's right, we're getting tanked tonight. I want to start out with just a little bit of theory as to how the modern, if we can call it that, uniflow tank for stunt has evolved. Control line stunt flyers probably put more effort into building and modifying their tanks than almost any other aero modeler, with the possible exception of the team race people. And I think that there's a fair bit that needs to be covered here. Let's start out with the prototype for every stunt tank that's ever really worked, and that is the water cooler. Okay, let's take a look at something we all know, a rather familiar critter. It's called a water cooler, and it's the prototype for just about every stunt tank. The bucket at the bottom, this is the part in the water cooler that actually gets cooled, is a relatively small volume, and it stays pretty much filled to a constant height. The way it stays filled to a constant height, or the thing that determines the height that it fills to, is the depth of the neck of the water bottle in the bucket. This is the part that, if you've ever loaded a water cooler with a fresh 5-gallon jug of water, you know it's kind of hard to get the thing turned over nice and cleanly and put in the bucket without spilling water all over the floor. What will happen is water will flow out of the jug and great big air bubbles will come up through the neck here to take up this dead volume up top. And of course you've all seen the bubbles in a water cooler going glug, glug, glug. The bottom will fill up and then will block off the ability of air to come through easily. The question is, yes, if you pushed on it, if you were to pressurize the system, you can always make water flow, but we're working under normal atmospheric or very low pressures, and the idea here is this will block off the flow of air out to get water to come back down. Now, as you drain fuel or water from the stopcock here, this level will drop down a little bit, and eventually the jug will take a gulp of air. Now in a water cooler, because this filler neck is very large, usually what, an inch and a quarter, an inch and a half in diameter, the gulps of air that come through are very large, and the level of water in the bucket in the bottom will vary as much as a half an inch, up and down real quickly. What we want to do in building a tank is to reduce the size of this nozzle so that the bubbles that come through are very small and this level stays very, very constant. And what that does, it buys us immunity from having the fuel head or the pressure of the fuel change due to this tank emptying. This is actually a very complicated system. For one thing, it's hard to fill this system upright and then fly it with the gravity or the centrifugal force pulling toward the wingtip. There's really no practical way to build a water cooler that works both right side up standing still and in effect sideways while you're flying. But the closest thing we can build to it is called the chicken hopper tank, and this is something that's used by a lot of the racing people, by some combat people who need to pick up fuel under very, very hard maneuvers, and some of the automobile racing people. Okay. Here's a schematic of the chicken hopper tank. The tank in cross-section, we should look at this first, and let me grab my pen. The tank from behind, and this is outboard, so the fuel will tend to stay to the right in your picture, has a small hole at the outside. I've just outlined this hole with a little gash here. That's not to say that there's a piece of tubing or anything in there. And this behaves just like the water cooler. Fuel, because there is some gravity, the fuel will be sitting out against the outside. Fuel sits against here and dribbles through and fills up the hopper part way. And it fills up the hopper part way because when we filled this tank, fuel could pour from here into the hopper up until it filled halfway and then block this off. So the hopper started life about, 2/3 full with a small air bubble in there. That small air bubble will be maintained right up until the end of the run, which means that this tank behaves as if it's separate from the main body of the tank, much the same way as the water cooler. Looking at the tank from the top, it looks like this. The main body of the tank, the hole, which is very small. It's just big enough to pass fuel. You don't want a big hole. And then the hopper, or the auxiliary tank. And it will run, as we said, partly filled. I haven't shown it here, but a chicken hopper tank needs a vent, and that vent should go to the upper inside front corner. And that same vent can be used for filling as an overflow, and also for a vent which could either be presented to the air or to muffler pressure. Mild pressure doesn't really affect the way the system works. It just makes it work better. And that vent should go in the front of the tank and come up here. Okay, inside front corner, up top. And from the back, you'll see it here. All right, that's a chicken hopper tank. And it does work very consistently. It's very, very useful when you have an engine that has very poor fuel draw. For example, a half-A stunt ship that Bob Hunt and I had worked on years ago. It was a prototype for doing some experiments with canards. The only way we could keep an 049 running through the incredibly tight corners this airplane would fly was to build a chicken hopper tank. And it was not an easy thing to do in the space we had available, I don't mind telling you. Chicken hoppers, by and large, are complicated. It's a pain to put this bump inside the airplane. And if you do fit it inside the airplane, you've lost a great deal of fuel volume that you could carry. And of course, we never build the noses on our airplanes any bigger than they have to be. So usually, we need this volume here. Okay? That's probably the biggest reason that we don't use chicken hoppers every day. Which leads us to Son of Chicken Hopper. Does this sound like a bad science fiction movie title? And, as promised, the Uniflow, Son of Chicken Hopper. Let me stop and talk a little bit about the philosophy of the kinds of tanks that we're going to talk about building. We're going to be talking about building tanks using the commonly available radio-controlled plastic tank. Two reasons for this. The first of them is I can take a plastic tank like this one over here, and I can hold it up to the light, say hallelujah, and I can see right through the tank if I hold it up to a bright light. The same bright light that I use for carving top blocks for my airplanes. And what I can do is see the position of the fuel pickup, I can see the position of the overflow vent for filling, and I can see the position, if I turn it around just right, of the Uniflow. All of these things I can do against sunlight. This is the kind of tank that I can adjust and play with at the field and optimize my engine run and fly it immediately afterwards to see if I did the right thing. I like this adjustability feature. Almost everything else on our airplanes is adjustable these days at the field, and there's no reason for the tank to be an odd man out. The second reason for using a plastic tank has to do with the original charter of this column. I don't know if you remember our first meeting here, but I had said that one of the things we were going to try to do was take the vast majority of those items we can find built for the radio control mass market, and with as little modification or grief as possible, modify them for our use so that we can do the things we want cheaply, effectively, and be able to buy them without having to ferret through old hobby shops and back shelves where you can't find anything for the toys. The plastic tank satisfies that requirement. Okay, you can pick one up, and if you don't like the size that you have, you just go get a bigger or smaller one. Yes, it does require a little bit of an adjustment in terms of your mindset. First, the idea that they work, they do. And secondly, you're going to start tailoring the dimensions of the nose of your airplane around these tanks, but that's hardly a problem. Okay, let's talk about the Uniflow tank. The basic idea of the Uniflow, if we assume that gravity is outboard, as we look at our top, really bottom view here, is we are going to substitute what used to be the hard divider of the neck of the bottle in the water cooler, or the dividing wall between the hopper and the main part of the tank and the chicken hopper. We're going to try and build a poor man's dividing wall, which is no relation to Hadrian's wall, a wall of bubbles, or a curtain of bubbles. The reason this curtain of bubbles, and by the way, it is not so neat as what I've drawn, the reason this curtain of bubbles makes something that resembles a wall is because if gravity pulls this way and the fuel, let's say that the tank is 2/3 full, the pressure in the fuel gets higher and higher the deeper down you go because of the weight of the fuel above it, which means that when the bubbles come out of the Uniflow line, whether it's muffler pressure or outside air vent, they will tend to hang like a curtain at pretty much the same level with respect to where the line tension or the gravity is. Actually, this curtain of bubbles only spreads over a small area and then starts to disperse. But for the purposes of explaining this, we can talk about there being a curtain of bubbles here. So we have a fuel pickup line, the Uniflow line, which gives us the curtain of bubbles, and then the third line will be the overflow vent, which you will cap during flying, and this line is used only for assuring that the tank is filled up. We'll describe this in detail later. These two lines here are tied together somewhat loosely so that they can slide past each other just the least little bit. Allow me to explain why. Looking from the front view, you can see that the fuel pickup line, I'm sorry, this is a rear view. Looking from the back, you can see the fuel pickup line coming out of its brass or copper tube, and a flexible line, usually with a short length of brass in the middle to keep it from being floppy. The fuel pickup line will be able to swing freely from the bottom outside corner of the tank to the top outside corner of the tank. The hole in the rubber stopper used here should be directly level with the hole used for the Uniflow line. Why is this? These two lines, when they are tied together, will tend to flop up and down together almost like on a hinge that runs through the two tubes. So if these two tubes are cockeyed to each other, then this pickup line will tend to flop up this way and down toward that corner, for example. And you don't want that. You want this pickup to always stay in the outside corner of the tank. The Uniflow line will run back along here, and we want to assure that it can't wrap around or go above or below the pickup line. We want it to stay level here. Just as we want them level here, we want the two lines level where the Uniflow ends. And we'll talk some more later about this distance here from the end of the Uniflow to the end of the pickup and what that does to the engine run. And we'll also talk about minor variations of the pickup here versus the Uniflow. I'm sorry, or the Uniflow versus the pickup in terms of height. Okay, those are the two major adjustments that you will make along with basic tank height. So we have three things we're going to be juggling when we play with our engine at the field. The first is tank height, and that's pretty much the same thing we've always done. The second will be the length of the Uniflow to the pickup, and then the third will be the height of the Uniflow compared to the tube for the pickup. which is really only an adjustment you make if you want to play around a little bit. But for the most part, you shouldn't have to do that much. Well, after a bit of a struggle, because this tank has been sitting around for about 1.5 years, I managed to pull the stopper out of this Sullivan 6-ounce tank. It's an RST6, the one with the straight or flat front. I prefer those to the ones with the slant front. The slant front makes it very difficult to get the lines to run straight like this. And I should mention that this tank came out of what was left of Bob Hunt's Saturn. So we know this tank was working beautifully right up until the moment. This is the guts of the tank here, and let me show you on our schematic what it looks like. This is the same view here, the pickup line and then the Uniflow line sistered to it. And I don't know if you can see this here, but if the tank front is vertical here, you can see that this hangs at a real nice angle, just about right to hit the outside edge of the tank, or the bottom edge of the tank, like this here. And from behind, once again, I'll hold this straight up to the camera, you'll see that the pickup is bent outward by the two lines together. Let me put this down on the table and you can take a closer look at it. All right, here we have the guts of that tank, and I've supported it on the table with this screwdriver. The reason being, these two lines now are held flush against the screwdriver and are parallel with the table. Okay? That allows you to see the orientation of the pickup, how it's bent like this toward the outside of the tank. The reason for this is that this pickup is not flexible this way. It is very flexible up and down. So this is preloaded to just rub the outside of the tank. Let me restore that. All right. The overflow line here is just high enough and just deep enough into the tank that it strikes right here where the tank has assumed its full height. And you want to make sure that there's just a tiny bit of clearance so that the metal tubing does not cut through the plastic. Let me turn this over. Okay, I think you see that. Now let's look at the detail of the Y here. For this tank, we've used a rather large distance from the pickup to the Uniflow opening. I have used, depending on the tank and the application, everything from soldering this Uniflow tube directly to this front corner of the pickup to all the way in the middle of the tank. And we'll describe in a moment what that does for you. But in general, running this pickup approximately 1 inch to 1.25 inches away from the back of the clunk, which is to say 1.75 inches away from the pickup end, makes for a much less critical run. Let's go back to the big diagram and see if I can't explain that to you. Okay, we're back with the schematic here, and let's look at what this curtain of bubbles might look like from a rear view. Here is the opening for the Uniflow, and that curtain of bubbles, because of both the outboard or centrifugal force and gravity pulling down, that curtain of bubbles might be spread somewhat like that. All right? Now, as the stunt ship transitions from positive G to negative G, this curtain of bubbles moves. You know how every time you pull a corner, the G loading pulls everything to the bottom of the airplane in the inside turn and pulls everything to the canopy in an outside turn? Well, bubbles, because they float, they have negative weight, go backwards. So in a hard inside corner, these bubbles will move up. in a hard outside corner, as the clunk moves here, these bubbles will try to move down. The deal is, they don't move in a nice, neat, orderly fashion. And what can happen is, if you start to pick up these bubbles with the pickup, the engine will brake hard and maybe even run away on you. What we like to do is to run the pickup just far enough in that you don't have that problem. And the symptom that you would be looking for if you think that the pickup is too far back is, number one, that the engine appears to brake hard in a square corner, but appears to run pretty much predictably through all three rounds, both inside and outside. Or the engine runs away during the square horizontal 8 where there are lots and lots of corners and you're foaming the fuel in the tank because the bubbles are thrashing back and forth, top to bottom, top to bottom. But the engine settles down again after you do a couple of level laps. That would be the symptom if the pickup were too far down. If the pickup is too far up, it's much less critical, but you don't get as much of the uniflow benefit. That is to say, you may notice that the end of the engine run is a little leaner than the beginning, and you may notice that the middle of the engine run goes a little bit rich as the fuel drains down and the uniflow uncovers. And just at that moment, there will still be enough fuel in the tank that there's enough fuel pressure due to gravity or centrifugal force, and the engine will appear to go rich in the middle of the flight. So those are your two sets of symptoms that you want to balance against each other. Like I said, it's much less critical making this distance from the pickup to the uniflow opening too big. You very rarely have a major problem. The tank doesn't work as nicely as it could. If the pickup is too far back, the regulation of the fuel pressure gets better and better right up until you start picking up bubbles and making the engine run inconsistently. Okay, let's look at the other adjustment, that of rotating the pickup and the uniflow versus each other. Come a little closer, I want to show you here. We talked about how the pickup line and the uniflow, where they end, the two holes, or the centers of the two tubings, should be level to each other in the tank. All right? Can you see those two spots? The little asterisks there. All right. Two adjustments that play with each other are, number one, shimming the tank up and down, and this is the classic adjustment that I think almost everyone out there understands, and moving these two pickup lines versus each other. They're not exactly equivalent, but they do pretty much the same thing. Ideally, you should start with these two pickups, or the lines, dead even with each other. And I'll show you what that looks like later on with our sample tank plumbing. You should start with these two level, and you should shim the tank up or down to make the inverted and upright laps and, let's say, the consistent soft maneuvers, 3 insides and 3 outsides, to run the same. You want to make the airplane run the same inside and outside in 1G to moderate Gs under most conditions, because the tank positioning governs long-term behavior. Now, the height of these two, of the uniflow versus the pickup, does have some effect on long-term behavior. Let me give you an example. If I shim, or if I twist the lines so that the uniflow is a little high, that makes the engine run rich upright and lean inverted. It's the same thing as shimming the tank up. Almost. Like I said, it's not exactly the same thing. The difference here is the curtain of bubbles now has moved compared to the fuel pickup. So while it has affected the overall engine run, it will affect the brake in a hard square corner even more. So if your engine brakes rich in the outside corners, that's a very common problem, you may wish to take this pickup, the Uniflow vent, and raise it up higher so that the curtain of bubbles is moved down some in the outside maneuvers, meaning there's less fuel pressure or fuel head above the pickup below the curtain of bubbles when you're upside down. I'll say that again because I said that rather fast. The Uniflow behaves somewhat like the position of the tank, but it's not really the position of the tank, it's the position of the curtain of bubbles. If you move it up, it's like moving the tank up. If you move it down, it's like moving the tank down. Only because you've moved the curtain of bubbles, the behavior you're changing the most is the hard high G corners. Now I think you understand why it was I said set this level and shim the tank to get upright and inverted laps the same, upright and inverted 3 rounds the same, and then play with this to get the brake the same both ways. Okay? Now we're going to go back to our sample bit of tank pieces, and I'll show you just how we do that. All right, here we have the innards to the tank from the Saturn, which, well, the airplane doesn't need it anymore, so I can make changes to it, and it's not a problem. What I want to do now is show you how to raise or lower this Uniflow exit versus the center line of the pickup tubing. The way I do that is by twisting both of these tubings in the rubber stopper in much the same way that you would braid a single loop rubber band in a rubber model. Now, how many of you remember how to do that, huh? The idea here is by twisting the two together, I can bias this. Let me show you. I'm going to twist this to your clockwise, and then I'm going to twist the pickup line the same amount. Let me put this back on the table now, and I'll put the screwdriver in. Can you see how much higher this is now? Okay, and now I'm going to twist it back the other way and demonstrate lowering the pickup. You may notice that the rubber stopper is giving me a great deal of resistance here. It's because this stopper is almost 2 years old. And this is an ideal time to talk about maintenance for your tank. There. You see how it's lower now? This rubber stopper has gotten all gummy and nasty after being in the airplane for about a year and then lying around for another 3/4 of a year. It's a good maintenance item and probably just a good thing to do in general to take the tank out of the airplane at the end of each season and plumb it fresh with a brand new rubber stopper and brand new fuel tubing at the beginning of every year. I think it's a really good idea. Certainly in terms of reliability, you'll appreciate it. So that is how you would raise or lower this Uniflow versus the pickup line. And like I said, you should really start out and try to do everything with these two lines dead level to each other. Because for the most part, the engine will run that way. 2 reasons to change it are, number 1, the engine does not brake quite as hard in an outside corner. Most engines tend to richen up a little bit in the outside corner. And the other reason is you've already shimmed the tank as far as you can go and you need to go a little further. And by moving the vent, you can effectively fool the tank into thinking that you moved it another, 1/16 or 1/8 of an inch. If you have to cheat, it's better than not having the adjustment available. Okay? Next, I want to look at the construction of this here T, or Y fitting. So let me pick this up again. And it's time to disassemble. All right, here we have the Y, and you can see it's been wrapped with wire and soldered. Nothing fancy here. All the edges have been very thoroughly deburred and even sanded with some 400 sandpaper to make sure that there aren't any sharp edges, and then very carefully cleaned out. And the angle of this Y is made so that these two lines flow nicely as far as the angles are concerned. Make sense? Okay. One of the things that could be done, and we didn't do here, is that most of these clunks are made just so that they can solder over the end of a piece of 1/8 inch tubing, eliminating, if we lengthen this piece of brass tubing or copper tubing, eliminating this extra piece of silicone rubber here, which is just another place for a leak or a split to happen. Okay? I kind of like that idea. If we do this and put the clunk out at the edge, there's no flexibility in the system. So when you plug the Y onto the two lines for the fuel pickup and for the uniflow, you will have to very carefully push them in to get the right angle, the right height this way, so that this clunk is all the way into the corner and just rubs the outside wall of the tank. And after you've done that, you will probably want to take a piece of copper wire and twist it around each one to maintain a nice tight fit, because the tubing does eventually swell with age and fuel exposure. That's really the big secret of the tank building, and I believe we've got most of the rules for tank height adjustment laid out here in the course of this chronicle. The last thing I want to talk to you about is putting the tank in the airplane and the relationship of vibration and fuel foaming to tank construction. Okay, there's the basic tank. We're going to put it into the airplane. We're going to run the fuel line in as straight a line as possible to the venturi, to the needle valve. No funny kinks, no running up over bulkheads, down under the firewall, around the engine 3 times. All of that stuff doesn't cut it. No fancy fueler valves, none of the fancy items that are made for the RC market where people are trying to avoid taking a fuel line off of the engine. Okay, all those products, forget them. Just plumb straight up to the engine with a good fine fuel filter, and don't do anything else in terms of the fuel line. And the uniflow will go to the muffler or pipe pressure line, as the case may be for your engine, and you'll put a cap over the filler vent or overflow. The other part of the installation that bears some talking about is one of the enemies of a stunt plane, both in terms of its longevity and in terms of how well the engine runs, and that is vibration. At some point, we here at Stunt Flyer Video are going to be doing some kind of an introductory project on a regular basis. A project for stunter, let's call it. And of course, that airplane will be a profile. Profiles present some of the worst problems for vibration because the nose of a profile, like this one here, the nose of a profile is thin in cross-section, and the fuselage to wing leading edge joint is really quite narrow side to side. A full-bodied stunter has a lot more rigidity because the glue joints on both sides are separated by a large distance, and stiffness goes with the distance squared when it comes to twisting things. So the nose of a stunter can twist much more readily compared to the wing than can a full-bodied stunter. For this reason, you will see sheet cheeks, half-inch sheet cheek cowls, or what have you on profile models, and the plywood doublers will be well done in a good design, because you really do want to dampen and transmit as much of the engine shake or vibration to the wing. The reason being, the wing is the stable platform, or the, let's call it the bedrock on which everything lies. Engine vibration, by the way, is, for the most part, all in rotation. There's very little shaking up and down. There's relatively little shaking side to side. Most of the impact or vibration of the engine is in torsion, rotating. And the wing has the most inertia, the most resistance to being moved that way. So the stiffer the nose is to the wing, the better off you're going to be. Now, on a profile model, you want to make sure that the twisting and shaking of the nose is not directly transmitted to the fuel, because what will happen to the fuel is that it will suds, and the engine doesn't run well on suds. It's great for taking baths, but it's not good for running model airplane engines. What you would like to do with two things. First, the plastic tank, it turns out, is itself more of a natural vibration dampener than is a metal construction tank. That's a good thing. I didn't mention it in the beginning. The second thing you would like to do, if you're rubber banding the tank to the side of the airplane, is to put a thin pad of some kind of foam rubber, possibly neoprene foam tape that comes with one side sticky, that's sold in hobby shops for lining radio control model wing saddles, where they bolt or rubber band their wings on. And if you are not using rubber bands, if you are using metal straps and screws and making arrangements that way to raise or lower the tank, then you should leave a tiny amount of room both between the tank and the fuselage and around the tank for a strip of that neoprene foam tape we talked about. Vibration and fuel foaming are the enemy. If you see the fuel is foaming on your airplane when you pick it up off of the ground with the engine running, because sometimes strange things happen when the model is sitting on the ground, you have a couple of options. The first is to loosen the mounting of the tank and see if that kills the vibration. And the other possible cure is to tighten the mounting of the tank. Sometimes one works where the other won't. This has to do with the RPM of the engine and the natural resonance of the mounting of the tank, the natural springiness of the tank and the weight of the fuel. So don't be afraid to experiment to see if you can kill the fuel foaming by either loosening or tightening the tank mount. Anyway, that's pretty much everything I know about tanks in about 15 or 20 minutes. And next time we get together, we'll talk a little bit more about the installation of a tank into a model and how the nose of the airplane can be stiffened up to improve engine runs. Until then, fly stunt.